You won't believe what happened to little Louisa, just 11 years old, when she was rushed to the hospital with a pain that, at first glance, it seemed to be just a feeling of indisposition. Louisa was a child like so many others, sweet, observant, with a shy smile and a huge desire to see the world. She loved little animals, drew on the walls, and dreamed of being a veterinarian, the kind of girl who wins everyone over with just a look. But everything changed on an ordinary morning. Inside the house, in the silence of children's room, a whispered sentence tore her mother's heart apart. "Mommy, my stomach hurts. It's a strange pain. It feels like something is hurting me inside." Her mother, Renata, thought it was a strong cramp. Her father, Marcelo, said it could be something she had eaten. But the minutes passed, and the pain only got worse. Louisa curled up, crying softly, hugging her pillow, not wanting to worry anyone. But inside, fear had already taken over. It was then that Renata ran to the room, and when she saw her daughter's condition, something inside her screamed. She picked her up and called her husband with a choked voice. The two of them got into the car without thinking, and they sped off toward the hospital in the small town of Fairgrove, in the interior of Texas. In the back seat, Louisa screamed, "Dad hurts so much, help me please." Renata tried to stay calm, but her hands were shaking, and Marcelo stepped on the gas, with tears in his eyes and his heart racing. The journey, which lasted 15 minutes, it seemed to have taken forever. When they arrived, there was no time to even wait at the reception. The girl was taken straight to the triage, and it was there, in that moment, that everything changed. The medical team, which was dealing with minor accidents and colds, stopped everything when they saw Louisa's face, pale, sweating cold, and her eyes rolling in pain. A nurse ran toward the central ward and shouted, "Call Dr. Valentin." Code red, "Now." What the doctors discovered brought the hospital to a standstill, and what came next, no one was prepared to hear it. This is a true story, a story that almost escaped silence, but it needs to be told if you believe that certain truths can no longer be hidden. Like it now and subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to see today will shock you. Take a deep breath, because what's coming next will shake you up. "It hurts, Mommy, it hurts so much." Renata tried to hold her daughter in her arms, try not to fall apart, while Marcelo was already on the phone, desperately seeking help. But Fairgrove was a small town, and that morning, the only doctor on duty was a general practitioner. Even so, they didn't wait. Renata dressed Louisa in a hurry. Marcelo grabbed the car keys with trembling hands, and together, without thinking twice, they ran straight to the city's emergency room. At the door of the small hospital, they were greeted by the doctor on duty that night, Dr. Valentin, a calm-looking man, but clearly tired from his long shift. He quickly examined Louisa, and soon noticed something unusual. Her belly was slightly swollen, almost imperceptible, but for him, it was a warning sign. "This is not normal for her age," he murmured, as he touched the girl's abdomen with extreme delicacy. He gave her an injection to relieve the pain, and he looked her parents in the eye firmly. "As soon as the sun rises, take her to Houston Central Hospital. They have the right equipment and experienced pediatricians there. This needs to be evaluated urgently." At 6 in the morning, Renata and Marcelo boarded the first bus with their daughter to Houston. During the trip, Louisa didn't say a word. She was pale. Her eyes were half closed. the fragile body surrendering to the pain. Renata held her daughter's hand tightly, trying to be strong, but the tears flowed silently. Each tear was a plea, a mother's silent desperation. Marcelo looked out the window. He swallowed hard. He tried not to break down. At the reception of the Central Hospital, they were greeted by a doctor known for her competence and care for young patients. Dr. Carolina Muniz, attentive, firm, and with a look that mixed experience and empathy, she listened to everything calmly. She asked quick questions. She analyzed the patient's history. And then, without hesitation, she said, "We're going to admit Luisa now. Abdominal ultrasound, complete blood count, CT scan. And call me as soon as the results start coming back. I want to follow up personally. No room for error." While Luisa was being taken away by the nursing team, Renata sat in the hallway, her head down, hands clasped in silent prayer. "Please, my God, just don't let it be something serious." Marcelo paced back and forth, not knowing where to look, not knowing what to do. Hours later, the exam started arriving. One of the residents called Dr. Carolina to the imaging room. She entered with firm steps. She approached the monitor. She looked. She frowned. "This here is not common," she murmured. She asked for the imaging specialist to come immediately. A few minutes later, the doctor arrived. He adjusted the screen. He zoomed in. He compared the results with the blood tests. The silence in the room was heavy. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the screen. "Call the pediatrics team. I want more opinions. Now." 2 more doctors came in. A third came in. In a few minutes, 4 specialists were gathered, all looking at the same point, whispering among themselves, exchanging serious, worrying looks. Something there didn't make sense. Or it did, but no one wanted to believe it. Meanwhile, in the next room, Luisa had been taken back. The medication was making her drowsy, but the pain was still there, stronger, sharper. Renata sat next to her daughter. She stroked her hair, trying to stay calm, but inside, she felt that something was very, very wrong. Marcelo entered the room, but he couldn't get closer. He just watched, with tears in his eyes. It can't be something that's serious. But it was. And at that moment, in the imaging room, the doctors already knew. They just didn't know how to tell them. Marcelo was standing, leaning against the wall of the room. His eyes were teary, his lips pressed tightly together. On the outside, he was trying to look strong. On the inside, he was already falling apart. He didn't know what would come next. And that was precisely the worst kind of despair. Not knowing, not understanding, feeling that something serious is happening, and not being able to do anything. Almost 2 hours after the last exam, the bedroom door opened slowly. Dr. Carolina came in. Her expression was more serious than before. She walked over to bed and examined Luisa with extreme care. She looked at her vital signs, evaluated her skin color, her breathing. Then she turned to her parents and said in a low voice, "Mrs. Renata, Mr. Marcelo, can you come with me to the conference room, please?" At that moment, Renata's heart almost stopped. She knew, as every mother knows, when a doctor calls the parents to talk in private, it's almost never good news. In the meeting room, the two were greeted by 2 more doctors. One of them was the imaging specialist who had analyzed the exams. The other was a resident on the pediatrics team. The atmosphere was silent, tense, almost too heavy to breathe. Dr. Carolina took a deep breath, folded her hands on the table, and began to speak firmly. We found something unusual in Luisa's exams. Renata immediately shook Marcelo's hand, who kept his eyes fixed on the doctor. Before we can draw any definitive conclusions, we need to do one more exam, a more specific procedure with contrast, to be absolutely certain of what we are seeing. Marcelo tried to remain calm, but his voice was weak. But will our daughter be okay? The doctor hesitated for a moment. She looked at them both sincerely and answered firmly, "She is stable, but we need to act quickly. Every hour is important." That same night, Luisa was taken for an advanced ultrasound with contrast. The exam was long, delicate, and with each passing minute, the anguish only increased. Renata, sitting in the waiting room, could no longer hold back her tears. Marcelo had his elbows on his knees, his hands over his face. He tried to be strong, but it was like living a nightmare. One of those where you know you're going to wake up, but you don't. Deep down, they both knew that something serious was coming. But what was about to be revealed? Not even in their worst nightmares could they have imagined. A little before 11 at night, the exam was ready. Dr. Carolina returned to the room, holding a white envelope in her hands. Her steps were slow. Her gaze was heavy. And just by the expression on her face, you could already tell that what was to come would not be easy. "Please, sit down," she said firmly. Renata held Marcelo's hand tighter. The two looked at each other without saying a single word. The doctor pulled up a chair. She sat down. She opened the envelope calmly. She took a deep breath, and then she said, "What I'm going to say now may be difficult to hear, but you need to be prepared." She began to take the images out of the envelope, placing them on the table. But before she could continue, the door to the room suddenly opened. A nurse came in, visibly distressed. She looked directly at the doctor and said, "Doctor, I'm sorry, but we have an emergency. It's serious." The nurse interrupted abruptly. Dr. Carolina stopped. She looked at Renata and Marcelo with empathy and said in a restrained voice, "Just give me a few minutes. I'll be right back, I promise." And she left the room in a hurry, leaving her parents in suspense. In the hospital, time seemed to have frozen. The hours passed slowly, dragged out, as if the world outside had stopped. Meanwhile, in the room, Luisa remained lying down, with her belly visibly more swollen, and the pain now was constant and unbearable. Renata never left her daughter's side. She stroked her hair, whispering comforting words, trying to be a pillar of strength, but inside she was in pieces. Marcelo paced up and down the hallway. He was sweating coldly. His eyes were red. His heart was racing like never before. He no longer knew whether to pray or scream or just wait for the worst. It was only around 20 past midnight that Dr. Carolina returned. She was carrying a clipboard in her hands and an expression on her face that made Renata and Marcelo get up immediately. "Let's talk in the hallway." "Please," the doctor said. They left. The door was closed carefully, and there, in the icy silence of that white hallway, under the fluorescent light, Dr. Carolina took a deep breath. She looked into the eyes of both parents. She paused briefly, and then she began to speak. "The test revealed something that took us by surprise. It's not an infection. It's not an intestinal problem or a virus. It's something much more serious." Renata and Marcelo looked at each other, confused and tense, unable to say anything. "Luisa is showing clear signs of pregnancy," the doctor continued, with the calmest tone she could muster. The world seemed to stop at that moment. Renata took a step back, holding her husband's arm to keep from falling. Marcelo froze. His face turned completely pale. His eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "This isn't possible," he murmured. "She's only 12. The doctor nodded, her eyes visibly watering. "I know, but the ultrasound confirmed the presence of a fetus. The pregnancy is advanced. We're talking about a late-stage pregnancy. Luisa is about to give birth." It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under Renata's feet. No, this is a mistake," she said, shaking her head, her voice breaking. "My daughter is just a child. She would never. This can't be happening." But it was. The tests were conclusive. There was a heartbeat. There was movement. There was life inside her. It was then that Marcelo asked a question that no one had yet dared to ask. Who did this to my daughter? The silence that followed was deafening. No one was breathing. At that moment, everything changed. From that moment on, the case stopped being just a medical one. It also became a police matter. The hospital management was immediately notified. A social worker was called in quickly, and the Chicago police were officially notified. The story of an 11-year-old pregnant girl began to circulate through the halls like lightning. The entire hospital was in shock during the preparations of birth. With exams, constant monitoring, and clinical analyses, one of the doctors noticed something unusual in the ultrasound images. They then called the head obstetrician, Dr. Enrique Martins, to review the details with extra care. A few minutes later, Dr. Carolina returned to the room. Her face was pale. Her gaze was tense. She addressed the parents with an expression full of concern. "We need to talk. We discovered something unusual, something we've never seen before in a case like this." Marcelo's eyes widened, overcome by a feeling of exhaustion and fear. "What do you mean? What else now?" The doctor didn't answer right away. She simply asked the two of them to accompany her to the private room. The atmosphere inside was heavy. The air seemed dense, suffocating, almost impossible to breathe. Meanwhile, the hubbub grew louder throughout the hospital. Nurses looked at each other in silence. Doctors walked quickly, whispering in low voices. "This doesn't make sense. How is this possible?" Renata, in a state of shock, repeated to herself, as if trying to find some kind of logic in the midst of the chaos. "How did this happen without me noticing? She was always so quiet, so sweet, with her dolls, with her drawings, always so innocent." Marcelo, however, remained silent, but there was something burning in his eyes, a contained fury, a mixture of deep pain, helplessness, and a thirst for justice. As much as the past could not be changed, he knew he could still protect his daughter, even if it was too late to prevent what had happened. On the medical side, the situation was getting worse by the hour. Luisa felt increasingly intense pain. The pregnancy was in its final stages, and the birth needed to be planned with the utmost urgency. It was then that Dr. Enrique, already looking at the images from the last ultrasound, frowned. He discreetly called Dr. Carolina. "Look at this. The baby looks healthy, but this formation on the side, that's not normal." On the screen, an unusual shadow appeared in Luisa's abdominal region, something that was not present in the previous exams, something that seemed out of place. Without hesitation, the doctor gave the order an MRI. Now. The atmosphere among the team was tense, very tense. While the exams were being performed, no one dared to give an explanation to the parents. It was necessary to be sure. And what that image would soon reveal would go far beyond anything that medicine had ever seen. Hours passed. Dawn was already taking over Chicago. The hospital was completely silent, but the tension was unbearable. The MRI images finally arrived. When the reports began to be analyzed, the medical team's room was plunged into absolute silence. One of the specialists, staring at the screen, muttered under his breath, This doesn't make any sense. The images didn't just show the baby. They showed something else. Next to the uterus was a strange structure, a living, organic-looking mass, but with no heartbeat, no movement, without any independent activity. Dr. Carolina stood still. With over 20 years of experience, she whispered almost voicelessly, I've never seen anything like this. This goes far beyond an early pregnancy. The head obstetrician, Dr. Enrique Martins, looked at the scan again and concluded firmly, whatever it is, this can't stay there. Let's open it up. We need to see it with our own eyes. The order was given. Emergency C-section. Now, Luisa's body, only 11 years old, would not be able to handle a natural birth, and time was running out. While the operating room was being prepared, Renata and Marcelo waited outside, motionless, in silence, as if the air had gone out of there. Renata kept her eyes glued to the door of the room. She wasn't crying anymore. Now, there was only emptiness on her face, a silence that screamed. Marcelo was on the other side of the hallway, his arms crossed, his fists clenched, his jaw clenched. But inside him there was fire. The police had already arrived. An officer was positioned discreetly in the hallway. The city didn't know yet, but there in that room, something never seen before was about to be revealed. Before entering the surgical center, her eyes already heavy from sedation, Luisa, still lucid, looked at the doctors around her and asked quietly, Why are so many people looking at me like that? No one answered, but that question echoed in everyone's hearts. And then, with all the professionals ready, the room was locked, the scalpels prepared, because what was going to be removed from inside that girl's body wasn't just a baby. It was a secret, a mystery that defied everything science knew, and that would forever change the lives of all those who were about to witness the impossible. The operating room was completely silent. The monitors pulsated, marking each heartbeat, but what could really be heard was a tension in the air. Dr. Carolina coordinated the final adjustments with the team. The head obstetrician, Dr. Enrique, took charge of the procedure, and there, next to them, the doctor responsible for general monitoring, the experienced Dr. Valentin, was also watching attentively. The surgery was about to begin, and what was about to happen was not something you would find in medical books. And everyone there knew this was no ordinary surgery. It was more than medicine. It was something that no one could explain. The anesthesiologist's signal was given. Dr. Valentin took a deep breath, and then he made the first incision. Slowly, precisely. Each layer of Luisa's abdomen was opened with extreme care, and it was there, on the third layer, that he stopped. His eyes widened. He froze. She stared at the surgical field and murmured, almost without a voice, "My God!" The team looked at each other, alarmed. Dr. Helena approached to see what had caused that reaction, and as she looked, she instinctively took a step back. There was something there, besides a baby. Another strange formation, as if it were connected to the uterus, but at the same time independent. "What is that?" whispered Dr. Helena. No one answered. Dr. Valentin continued cautiously. The baby was still there, and it was a priority. Minutes later, the weak cry that everyone was expecting finally echoed. It was a boy, fragile, small, weighing just over 2 kilos. He was breathing with difficulty, but he was alive. He was immediately taken to the incubator, where a pediatric team was already waiting. But no one could take their eyes off what was still inside Luisa's body, a shapeless mass, covered by a thin membrane, no heartbeat, no movement, with a disturbing appearance. It was as if it didn't belong in that body, as if it had been inserted there. Dr. Valentin, still analyzing, shook his head in disbelief. As soon as we stabilize Luisa and the baby, we'll remove this and send it for immediate analysis. He looked seriously at Dr. Helena. His voice was still firm, but his gaze betrayed fear. Because, honestly, I have no idea what this is. Luisa was sleeping soundly under the effects of anesthesia, not knowing what had just happened, not knowing that her son would be born, and without imagining that inside her there was something that could change everything. In the room, the mood was far from one of relief, because even with the successful birth, the mystery was just beginning. There were no smiles. There was no relief. In the operating room, the tension was thick, almost palpable. The baby had been born, but the team's attention was not on him. It was on what was still inside Luisa's body. Dr. Valentin approached the surgical field again. With slow and precise gestures, he began to remove the tissue around the unknown structure. Beside him, Dr. Helena watched with wide eyes. She broke the silence. Her voice choked. This doesn't look like a cyst or a tumor. It looks like something organic, but completely deformed. Everyone's eyes turned to the monitor. The live images showed that thing with disturbing clarity. It was a gelatinous formation covered by a translucent membrane, connected to the uterus by something that resembled a fibrous cord. But the worst part, the hardest part to face, it was inside that membrane, a structure with an undefined shape, vaguely human, an incomplete body, as if it had started to develop and then stopped. Dr. Valentin stepped back. He took off his gloves slowly. He looked at the screen as if wondering if it was real. Call the head of pathology. Prepare an immediate biopsy. This needs to be analyzed now. While the team moved, still in shock, outside the room, Renata and Marcelo waited. And then a sound crossed the hallway. Weak, but unmistakable. The cry of a baby. Renata put her hands to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. She looked at her husband and whispered, "Did you hear?" He cried, "Our grandson," or... She didn't finish, as if the thought itself was too confusing to be said out loud. It was then that the police chief approached. With a firm but respectful posture, he approached the couple. A social worker stood next to him. As soon as Luisa is conscious, we'll need to talk to her. Carefully, calmly, but we need to understand what happened. Renata nodded, still in shock, and the police chief, after a brief pause, added, "If she's pregnant, someone did this to her." The social worker touched Renata's shoulder. She looked into her eyes sweetly and said, "The priority now is Luisa. She's going to need a lot of support, psychological and emotional, and so are you." And it was at that moment that the door to the room opened. Dr. Valentin appeared, his tired face, his stained gloves, but his gaze filled with something that no one wanted to hear. He was pale, his gaze lost. Dr. Valentin walked slowly towards Renata and Marcelo, his voice low, controlled, but filled with a weight that seemed to crush each word. The baby is alive. He's a boy. He was taken to the neonatal ICU. He's having trouble breathing, but he's strong. Renata held Marcelo's hand tightly, but before they could ask anything, Dr. Valentin continued. However, we found something besides a baby, an unusual formation. We're still trying to understand what it is. Marcelo narrowed his eyes, confused. Formation? What kind of formation? Dr. Valentin sighed, searching for the right words. It means that there was something else inside Luisa. Something that is definitely not part of a normal pregnancy. We have already sent the material for analysis. As soon as we have any answers, I promise we will explain everything clearly. Silence. Renata's gaze met Marcelo's. No sound was emitted, but the eyes said it all. Fear, confusion, disbelief, as if they were living a nightmare from which they simply could not wake up. And the most distressing thing? Nothing, absolutely nothing, would prepare them for what was to come. Because what was removed from Luisa's womb was not just strange, it was impossible. In the pathology department of Brookfield Hospital, an emergency protocol was activated. The contents removed from Luisa were immediately isolated, encapsulated in a sterile capsule, sealed, escorted by one of the most experienced technicians in the laboratory. The atmosphere in the corridors was tense. It wasn't just scientific curiosity. There was something more. Something like fear. Dr. Helena, head of pathology, received material as soon as it arrived at the laboratory, and the first image under the microscope was enough for her to stop any other task. She frowned, absolute silence. Then she immediately called 2 experts in embryology and genetics. What they saw was, to say the least, disconcerting. The formation, at first glance, resembled a malformed fetus. But there was something different, an incomplete symmetry, an irregular pattern, as if there had been a deliberate attempt at replication. It wasn't a common malformation. It was something constructed. Incomplete, yes, but with purpose. Meanwhile, in room 208 of the hospital, Luisa was beginning to wake up. Her eyes opened slowly. The light in the room bothered her. Luisa blinked. She tried to understand where she was. The white ceiling, the continuous sound of machines, a strange smell of alcohol and silence. Renata's face appeared before her, with teary eyes and a trembling smile. She approached, gently stroking her daughter's hair. "Daughter," she said in a whisper, "the baby is alive. It's okay, my love." Luisa blinked once more. It took her a while to understand. "The baby," she repeated, her voice weak, scratching her throat. But then something changed. The expression of relief disappeared. Her face contracted, as if a memory, an image, a sensation flashed through her mind like lightning. She put her hand to her belly, instinctively, and she murmured, almost without a voice. There was someone else there. Renata frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean, daughter? What do you mean by that?" But Luisa didn't answer. She just turned her face away, slowly, and stared at the white ceiling without blinking. She knew what she had felt during all those months. The nightmares, the feeling of being watched from the inside, the cold that went through her bones, even on the hottest days. That wasn't just pregnancy. It never was. On the lower floor of the hospital, In the genetic analysis department, the tests were progressing, and the first results left the specialists in shock. The structure analyzed showed genetic traits identical to Luisa's, and also to those of the newborn baby. It was as if a duplication had begun, but it had been interrupted halfway. One of the embryologists, staring at the monitor with wide eyes, murmured, "This isn't just a fetal malformation. It's an attempt at symbiosis." But it failed. Dr. Helena, who was monitoring the data in real time, pressed her lips together tightly. Dr. Valentin, on the other side of the room, read the reports with a pale face. Seriously, he turned to his colleague and said in a low voice, "This can't happen from here. Not yet." Dr. Helena simply nodded. There was much more behind it. Much more than anyone there was prepared to face. Outside the hospital, night had already covered Brookfield with an icy blanket. The wind blew through the streets, but what was really chilling was the silence in the hallways. Marcelo paced back and forth, restless. His footsteps echoed empty. Renata remained seated, her eyes fixed on the floor, her arms crossed over her chest, as if each second was draining the little energy she had left. It was as if time had stopped. It was then that the reception door opened. The social worker entered first. Behind her, the officer in charge of the case. His eyes were hard, steady, but there was a spark of perplexity there, as if not even he was ready for what he would have to deal with. They both entered the room with a harder expression than before. The social worker and the officer in charge of the case. Something had changed. The silence between them said more than any word spoken. The officer was direct. "We need to talk to Luisa." But he paused. His gaze shifted for a moment, as if he were measuring each word with extreme care. Renata, sitting in the chair next to the reception, looked up, her heart already racing. "There's more," he said. "We received an anonymous complaint 3 months ago." The room fell silent. According to the complaint, Luisa was being watched. And something strange must have happened after she disappeared for 3 days, right at the beginning of her pregnancy. Marcelo reacted immediately. "This can't be right. She never left the house without telling us." "Never." Renata, in shock, murmured, She would have told us." The social worker approached gently. She bent down until she was at Renata's height, and in a soft voice, she said, "Maybe she doesn't even know. When the trauma is deep, the mind blocks. It creates gaps. It erases parts of the memory to protect it from what is unbearable to remember." Upstairs, in the almost dark room of the recovery room, Luisa was alone. The monitors emitted constant but soft sounds. Outside, the night covered Brookfield with a blanket of silence. She looked out the window. The tears fell, silently, but it wasn't physical pain. Not only, it was a sensation, a strange emptiness, a fear she couldn't name. Suddenly, something made her shiver. In the reflection of the window glass, for an instant, she saw other eyes behind hers. Fixed, dark, empty. She blinked, and she was alone again. Or, at least, that's what she thought. In the Genetic Analysis Center, the environment was silent, tense. The cold lights on the benches illuminated tubes, vials, and slides. One of the samples collected during Luisa's cesarean section was being isolated for more detailed study. And then something completely unexpected happened. Under the microscope, the inert tissue began to move. A subtle alarm flashed on one of the sensors. The technician in charge approached, thinking it was just a calibration error. He calmly adjusted the focus, but when he looked, his expression changed immediately. Dr. Valentim, the tissue, it's moving. Dr. Valentim, who was already leaving the room with a report in his hands, stopped. He came back and approached the microscope. He looked and felt his body freeze. What he saw, it wasn't just movement. It was spontaneous electrical activity. Microscopic impulses ran through the sample, as if nerves were trying to reconnect. This is not a common regeneration, Dr. Valentim murmured, unable to look away. Beside him, one of the monitors began to register rhythmic oscillations, pulses, similar to heartbeats. But that was not a heart. The silence in the examination room was almost absolute. Only the continuous sound of the equipment filled the room. Dr. Valentim remained motionless in front of the screen. The enlarged image showed an unusual anomaly in Luisa's upper abdominal region, detected during the postoperative exams. He called one of the attending physicians with a quick gesture. This here was not reported in the previous ultrasound, he said, pointing to the image. At first it looks like scar tissue, but look at the vascularization around it. She analyzed it carefully. This is not common in newborns, and it shouldn't even be there. We sent a sample for biopsy. It just arrived. The result was clear but disturbing. An active cell cluster with a genetic pattern similar to Luisa's and Renata's. It was not a tumor. It was an incomplete embryonic formation. It could have been a monochorionic twin pregnancy, the doctor explained, when one of the embryos develops normally and the other stops in the first few weeks. Valentim nodded. But the strange thing is the location. This mass was not in the uterus. It was located near the liver. She took a deep breath. It could be a rare case of fetus in fetu. Are you saying that Luisa was carrying the remains of her own twin brother inside her body? Valentim did not answer immediately, but that was it. In the recovery room, Luisa was sleeping under light sedation. Her vital signs were stable, but the doctors already knew this case would be monitored for many years. There was no immediate threat, but the history required constant attention. That formation, successfully removed, could have caused serious complications if it had not been detected in time. Downstairs, Renata and Marcelo had been called for a private conversation. Dr. Valentim entered with an envelope of tests in his hands. He sat down with them with a calm but firm expression. The emergency surgery was successful. Luisa is out of danger. But we need to be transparent with you. He opened the envelope. He showed them the images. He explained carefully. During the procedure, we found a non-viable embryo formation inside her abdominal cavity. Most likely, a second embryo that stopped developing early in the pregnancy. It is rare, but it does happen. Renata put her hand to her mouth, unable to contain her emotion. Marcelo remained silent. This does not mean that she will have any after effects. The doctor continued, but we will monitor her development very carefully. The couple simply nodded, still in shock. They had their daughter in their arms. But now they knew that she had come into the world carrying an even deeper story than they could have imagined. What did you discover? Renata asked, her voice breaking, as if her heart had already foreseen what was to come. The officer in charge of the case, next to Dr. Valentim, sighed deeply. His eyes were lowered, as if they were carrying the weight of everything they were about to reveal. Luisa was admitted to the hospital with severe abdominal pain and clear signs of physical assault, recent injuries, and others that were older. Renata's eyes widened. Marcelo clenched his fists, feeling his body go cold. Does that mean that someone She mumbled, unable to finish. Yes, the officer replied, firmly and painfully. Someone abused your daughter. And the evidence shows that this happened for a long time, long before the pregnancy. The ground seemed to disappear beneath Renata's feet. She staggered, and Marcelo ran to hold her. Neither of them could say anything. Only silence screamed, "We will hear from her as soon as the doctors allow it," continued the police chief. But with all the necessary psychological support, the priority now is to protect her and to understand who did this and how no one saw it before. Upstairs, in the hospital conference room, Dr. Valentin was talking to the social worker and the unit psychiatrist. Luisa's condition is delicate, said the psychiatrist. She may be dissociating from reality. This is common in victims of prolonged abuse, especially in childhood. The mind blocks. It blacks out. And sometimes it creates alternative realities to protect itself from the pain. The social worker nodded, apprehensive. The hardest part is that no one noticed her disappearance for 3 days. Not the school, not the neighbors, not even her own parents. She was there, but alone. What really worries is the context, the pregnancy, the traumas, and the complete emotional isolation of this girl. Later, late in the morning, Luisa woke up. Her eyes opened slowly, confused. The light made her frown. She tried to sit up, but her body didn't respond. The nurses approached carefully. One of them ran to the hallway. She woke up, called Dr. Valentin, and notified the psychiatrist. Renata was called to the room. Before entering, she was stopped by the doctor. Renata, listen. She may not remember everything, or she may remember in fragments. It's important that you don't pressure her. Just be present. She nodded, with tears in her eyes. She took a deep breath and went inside. Luisa turned her face towards her mother. Her lower lip trembled, and her eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. Renata ran to her daughter, kneeling beside the bed. She held her hand tenderly and tightly, as if she never intended to let go. "I'm here, my love. You're safe now. I swear no one will hurt you again." And there, in the silence of the room, mother and daughter were reunited. It wasn't the end of the pain, but it was finally the beginning of healing. For a few minutes, the two remained silent, but there was something that needed to be said. Luisa then whispered, her eyes fixed on the window. "I don't remember everything, but sometimes I dream. I dream of a dark room, of someone calling me. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out." Renata closed her eyes. The pain was unbearable. "And the baby?" she asked hesitantly. Luisa hesitated too. Then, slowly, she put her hand to her now empty belly. "He's still crying, and here, even after he left." In the hospital's boardroom, the doctors were gathered around a report. The preliminary results of the biopsy had arrived. Dr. Valentin read them silently next to the social worker. Then he looked up and said in a heavy voice, "The tissue we removed isn't a tumor. It's not just a fetal malformation either. There are genetic traces of a second fetus, a parasitic twin, possibly." Everyone looked at each other. The social worker was the first to react. "Are you saying she was pregnant with two?" Dr. Valentin took a deep breath and continued. "In a way, yes. But only one was born. The other developed until about 5 months. Then it stopped, but it was not absorbed as usually happens. It remained inactive, connected to the uterus by a rudimentary structure, as if it had stayed to observe." The silence that formed seemed to weigh tons. This raises a delicate issue, he added. If there was more than one fetus, there may have been more than one episode of violence. The atmosphere in the room froze. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Louisa watched the world through the window. Outside, life went on. Cars passed by, people walked by, indifferent. No one knew what she carried inside. In the neonatal nursery, her baby slept, small, fragile, but with a strange presence hovering around the incubator, as if something there was not finished. Louisa knew that story had not started on the day of the birth, and definitely it would not end there. 3 days had passed. Louisa remained hospitalized, accompanied by psychologists, social workers, and nurses who took turns day and night. The baby remained stable in the neonatal ICU, fed through a tube. Renata did not leave the hospital. She slept on a hard chair next to the bedroom door, as if her silent vigil were capable of keeping the real world inside and the other outside. That morning, the child psychologist came in again. It was Dr. Helena. She brought with her a blank notebook, colored pencils, and a kind look. She sat down in front of Louisa, placing the material on the side table. "Do you want to draw today?" Louisa looked at the paper. Her fingers moved slowly to the black pencil, and, without saying a word, she began to draw. First, a bed, then a door half open, shadows behind it, and 2 eyes, large, empty, without pupils, peering through the crack. Dr. Helena frowned slightly. "Who are those eyes, Lou?" She stopped. The pencil fell from her hand. They never left. Louisa hesitated. She picked up the blue pencil that was on the table. The tip trembled between her fingers. She started with a line, then circular strokes, thin lines, heavy shadows. She didn't say a word for several minutes. When she finished, she slowly turned the drawing to the psychologist. Dr. Helena observed it in silence. It was a small room, no windows, a bed in the corner, a locked door, and in the center, a chair. Someone was sitting on it. There was no face, only eyes and shadow, watching. "Does this place exist, Louisa?" Dr. Helena asked, her voice soft. The girl remained silent. Then she answered, without looking at anyone. "That's where he took me when he said I was special." The psychologist held her breath for a second. "He who? I don't know his name. He just said for me to call him Uncle." Meanwhile, in the police chief's office, the expert reports were arriving with more details. Injuries in different stages, compatible with ongoing abuse, old bruises, recent marks. The toxicology test confirmed something even more disturbing. Sedatives in the body, potent substances, the kind of compound that could keep a child unconscious for hours, maybe days. Marcelo was there. His jaw was clenched. His eyes were red but dry. "And you still don't know who did this to my daughter?" he asked, trying to contain his anger. The police chief nodded, his expression heavy. "We're investigating several lines of investigation. We already know that Louisa was missing for about 3 days. School records indicate that, on some mornings, she would simply disappear. Hours later, she would reappear, as if nothing had happened, always close to the end of classes, in time to go home." He turned the monitor towards her. These images were captured by security cameras at a gas station 80 kilometers from here. They show a girl, who looks a lot like Louisa, getting into a white car. The driver has not yet been identified, but we have part of the license plate. We are tracking her. Meanwhile, in the psychologist's office, Louisa had started drawing again. This time, a crib. Inside, a baby with closed eyes. And next to it, an adult figure wearing a mask, a plain mask, expressionless. He watched everything. She whispered, almost as if confessing something she shouldn't. Dr. Helena remained silent. Louisa, do you remember where this place was? The girl thought for a few seconds. It was far away, very far away. The car shook a lot sometimes. But I remember the smell of wet earth. And every now and then you could hear a bell. At night in the hospital room, Dr. Valentin entered with calm steps. He sat down next to the bed with the care of someone carrying a difficult truth. Hi, Lou. How are you feeling today? She looked at him, her eyes sunken. Better? I think. He smiled gently. Your baby is doing well. He's fighting, but he misses you. Louisa looked away. Her discomfort was visible. The words came like an arrow, and inside, she just wanted to run away from there. I'm afraid to look at him, she replied after a long silence. Dr. Valentin tilted his head a little, his voice firm but soft. Why? She took a while. His hands gripped the sheet tightly, as if trying to contain a pain that could no longer be contained. Because I don't know if it'll remind me of everything I've lived through or of everything I've lost. Those words echoed in Renata's head for hours, even in the silence, even in the darkness of the room, when everyone had already fallen asleep. The pain was still there. In the neonatal ICU, Renata was allowed to approach the incubator. Slowly, she placed her hand on the glass. Her heart was heavy. Her eyes were watering. In there, so small and fragile, was her grandson. The baby opened his eyes, and for a moment, emotion took over her. But then she stopped. She remained still. Something in that baby's gaze made her spine shiver. He wasn't crying. He wasn't moving. He just looked right at her, startlingly, as if he recognized her. A shiver ran through Renata's body. She took a step back, took a deep breath, and whispered with a choked voice, You will have a different life. You will grow up surrounded by love. I promise. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, an unmarked police car parked discreetly. The police chief got out with a brown envelope in his hands. Inside, the result of the genetic test that had been done in a hurry. He stood there on the sidewalk for a moment. The envelope seemed to weigh a ton. He opened it. Read it again. His face froze. This can't be right. He closed the envelope slowly. He took a deep breath and went inside. In the hospital cafeteria, now empty, isolated, filled with an almost ritualistic silence, the police chief met with Dr. Valentin, the social worker, and the psychologist. The lab repeated the test 3 times, said the police chief, staring at the papers, and the result remains. He placed the documents on the table. The baby shared genetic material with the mother, as if they were siblings. On the father's side, the silence that followed was brutal. Dr. Valentin lowered his eyes in disbelief. That can only mean one thing. The social worker, her voice almost muffled, ventured, Is the aggressor in the family? The police chief just nodded. It means we need to look within. Now, because Louisa is still at risk, and the baby, too. This time, no one said anything else. The silence spoke for everyone, and the weight of the truth fell on everyone like a stone. She still hasn't said any names, said the psychologist, looking at Dr. Valentin. But we know she knows. The blockage we're dealing with is typical of interfamily abuse. She paused, took a deep breath. The mind protects, it closes doors, create lies to endure, pretend it wasn't real, but it was. At the end of that afternoon, something changed. For the first time since the birth, Louisa asked to see the baby. Renata was with her in the room. When she heard the request, she froze inside, but she just nodded. A few minutes later, the nurse appeared with the wheelchair. She pushed it slowly through the corridors to the neonatal ICU. The silence between them was thick, as if the air carried more than words. When she got there, Louisa stopped in front of the incubator. She stood still, breathing slowly. Her eyes were watery. Her chin was trembling. Then she took a step forward and got closer. The baby was sleeping. Small, fragile, but there, present. "Does he look like me?" whispered Louisa, her voice almost muffled. Renata forced a smile, but inside her heart was breaking. A little his nose. The chin. Louisa nodded silently, but she didn't take her eyes off him. He's so small, and yet it seems like he knows everything. Renata frowned. "What do you mean, daughter?" Louisa took a while to answer. She swallowed hard, her gaze distant. "When I close my eyes, I still see that dark room. I still hear the whispers. But now, he's there too." A shiver ran through Renata's body. She looked at her daughter, scared. "Who, Lou?" Louisa didn't answer directly. She just raised her hand to the glass of the incubator, slowly, as if she were touching something sacred. "Will he grow up?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the baby. Dr. Valentin was nearby. He approached, with the calm of someone who understands the weight of the moment. "Yes, he will," he answered in a gentle voice. "He'll grow up. He'll be strong." Louisa didn't say anything, but her hand was still there, firm on the glass. Then her voice came out low, almost a whisper, almost a secret. "And will he know everything that happened?" Dr. Valentin looked at Renata. Then he answered carefully. "Only if you want to tell him, Louisa. Only if you think he needs to know." Louisa remained silent, her eyes fixed on the baby. And then, with her fingers still resting on the glass, she said softly, "I just don't want him to grow up afraid to close his eyes." Hours later, Marcelo was called for a private conversation with the police chief. The room was silent, somber. The air seemed heavy. The police chief was holding some papers in his hands. The tension was almost palpable. "Mr. Marcelo, we need you to cooperate with a DNA test." Marcelo frowned in surprise. "Are you accusing me?" "It's not an accusation. It's protocol. The expert reports indicate that the attacker could be someone very close, a first-degree relative." The silence that followed was long. Marcelo closed his eyes. He took a deep breath and answered without hesitation. "Do it. Do whatever you have to do. I want the truth, too." The police chief nodded, but something in his eyes made it clear. They were closer than ever. If it wasn't Marcelo, then who was it? With the support of two specialists, Dr. Valentin and psychologist Dr. Helena, the investigation was expanded. School documents were cross-referenced with family records, visitor lists, old schedules. And then something came up. A new request for an examination was made. This time for Luisa's maternal uncle, Renata's brother. He had left the family months before, after a fight with Marcelo. He lived far away, but in previous years, he was a constant presence in the house. He would show up without warning, sometimes even staying for days. Luisa's school records revealed a worrying pattern. Whenever her uncle showed up more frequently, she would start skipping classes. she would disappear for hours, always close to the time she was supposed to come home from school. Renata couldn't believe it. The words came out with difficulty, as if they didn't make sense. That is impossible. They were always so close. He said he loved her like a daughter. He took care of her when I wasn't there. One by one, the sentences began to fall apart. The shock was total. My heart was in pieces. Meanwhile, alone in the hospital room, Louisa drew another sheet of paper, another piece of the truth, another fragment of the pain that was beginning to take shape. This time, she drew 2 dolls, a big one with a big smile, a small one crying. And in the corner of the paper, with her handwriting still uncertain, she wrote. He said it was love. Time stopped, because now the truth was too close. And no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what it would bring. On the morning of the Silent Friday, the DNA results of Louisa's uncle were ready. Dr. Valentin received the envelope in his hands. He handed it directly to the police officer, who opened it right there, in the presence of Dr. Helena, Dr. Valentin himself, and Renata, the mother. The baby's biological father was Louisa's uncle. The police chief closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath and said, without hesitation, "Request a warrant." Now, the man was temporarily living in a relative's house in a neighboring city. He was easily located. He couldn't resist being approached. At the police station, he sat down in front of the police chief with a disturbing calm of someone who didn't understand, or didn't want to understand, the gravity of what he had done. She never said no, he murmured. She liked me. It was just a joke at first. The silence that fell seemed to tear the air apart. The police chief kept his gaze steady. She was 11 years old. You knew exactly what you were doing. The man lowered his head. The voice came out low, weak, almost a distorted lament. No one looked at her the way I did. I protected her. She said she loved me, that she trusted me. The police officer interrupted. He didn't need to hear any more. That was enough. At the hospital, Renata received the news from the hands of the social worker. She read the information once, then again, and then she went into the bathroom and vomited. She sat down on the cold floor. She collapsed. My brother, the boy I raised with me, who I rocked in my arms, who I played with, who I taught to be good, how could he do this to my daughter? The words came out broken, from the pain, from the disbelief, from the horror of a truth that tore everything apart inside. She cried like someone trying to expel a pain that doesn't fit in their body. Later, it was up to Marcelo to tell Louisa the truth. She was sitting on the bed, her eyes fixed on the window. Dr. Helena, the psychologist, was by her side. Marcelo approached slowly. His eyes were filled with tears. His voice was as firm as he could be. "Daughter, the test confirmed it. It was your uncle." Louisa didn't cry. She didn't react immediately. She remained silent, just a few seconds, but long enough for time to seem to stop. Then, softly, as if she found a lost piece of herself amidst the rubble, she whispered, "So I'm not crazy." Dr. Helena leaned in. Her voice was soft, almost like a hug. "You never were Louisa. No one thought you were." Louisa closed her eyes, and for the first time, the silence inside her was different. It was no longer fear. It was recognition. She took a deep breath, and there was a trace of relief in her voice. "I tried to forget. I tried to believe it was just a nightmare. But every time he came close, I felt a hole inside me." She squeezed her eyes tightly, as if at that moment she gathered courage for what was to come. Marcelo, by joint decision with the Justice Department, remained temporarily in the old house, cooperating with the police, preserving evidence that was still under analysis. Luisa's uncle was in jail. The case against him was moving forward quickly. The medical reports, the drawings, the exams, the testimonies, everything was documented. Everything was clear, but a doubt, silent, insistent, hung in the air. What would be done with the baby? In the new house, small, protected, silent, time passed differently. Luisa kept the curtains closed in the bedroom. The crib was next to the bed. The boy, weighing just over 2.5 kilos, had been discharged from the neonatal ICU. He was healthy. He cried at night. He slept little. He continued to be an enigma to his own mother. Luisa watched him from a distance, as if facing something sacred and profane at the same time. Renata was the one who did everything. She bathed him. She changed his diapers. She fed him. She sang. Luisa watched, but she didn't come near him until one night, after a more intense crying fit, which seemed to come from a very old place inside her, she murmured, "I want to hold him." Her voice came out low, trembling. Renata, surprised, stopped. She looked into her daughter's eyes, and then, carefully, she placed the baby in her arms. For the first time, Luisa didn't tremble. She stayed there, in silence, rocking gently, the little face falling asleep against her chest. And for the first time, something broke inside Luisa, but not in pain. It was something else. It was the silent sound of a chain breaking, of a guilt that wasn't hers beginning to dissolve, of a new, tenuous bond being born there between two souls that didn't choose pain, but were choosing to continue. That night, Luisa didn't let go of the baby for hours. She didn't say much, but she didn't look away either. The silence between them was no longer one of rejection. It was one of trying, of a bond forming with trembling but present hands. Renata watched from afar. Her daughter, so tiny in her arms. Her grandson, still so fragile, but with an inexplicable calm in her lap. It was at that moment that Renata understood. It wouldn't be easy, but maybe it wouldn't be impossible. In the following days, something changed in Luisa. Small gestures, subtle movements. She started to get up on her own during nighttime feedings. She learned to change diapers, even though she was still afraid. She spoke little, but she started to sing softly to the baby, songs invented on the spot with simple, off-key words. But with a care that can't be taught, it can only be felt. Marcelo, who was still physically isolated by court order, set notes with the support of social workers. "You are stronger than any story they try to write for you. We are with you, always." Luisa kept them all in a shoebox, under the bed, as if collecting hope. The legal process was moving forward. Testimonies from doctors, psychologists, teachers, and Luisa herself were being organized. Dr. Helena, next to the prosecutor, followed each step. She knew it was not enough to punish the guilty party. It was necessary to create possibility for the future for those who were left with the scars. And then a new dilemma presented itself. The baby. Would he stay with Luisa? Would he be adopted by another family? Would he grow up away from his mother, so as not to carry the pain of his origins? Luisa listened to everything attentively. The social worker explained the options carefully, without rushing, without pressuring. She just listened and remained silent. That night, She held the baby in her arms as she had been doing, but this time she rested her face against his and whispered, "I'm still scared. But if you don't give up on me, I won't give up on you either." And then she cried, for the first time, without fear of pain, without hiding from it, because now she knew that pain existed, but it also existed beyond the pain. The next morning, she looked the social worker in the eyes and said firmly, "I want to stay with him. I want to try." And at that moment, she wasn't just a survivor. She was a girl who chose love as her response to horror. Louisa's decision surprised everyone. Even Dr. Helena, accustomed to seeing victims give up on motherhood, had to contain her emotions when she heard that sentence. "I want to stay with him. I want to try." It was like hearing the voice of someone rising from the ashes with their own hands. There was no illusion, no romanticization. There was awareness of the size of the challenge, of the weight of the story. But above all, there was a choice. The public prosecutor's office began the process to ensure that Louisa would maintain temporary custody of the baby. Renata, alongside her daughter, committed to ensuring the necessary emotional and structural stability. The protection network expanded. Psychologists specializing in childhood trauma, a sensitive and prepared pediatrician, monitoring by the Child Welfare Council, support from a local NGO focused on family reintegration after violence, and, perhaps most importantly, a school welcomed Louisa with respect, without judgment. There, she went back to studying, at her own pace, with a special plan, along with other girls who also carried silences similar to hers. She was no longer the girl in the news. She was just Louisa, with her notebooks, her drawings, and now a baby in her arms. The baby, who still didn't have a name, started to smile more often. Even without understanding, he responded to his mother's presence with almost instinctive calm. It was during a routine appointment when the pediatrician casually asked, "What have you been calling him at home?" Louisa answered, almost without thinking, "Lucas." That was the name she gave him in her drawings. On the nights when she whispered made-up stories to make him sleep, a simple name, strong, full of light, Lucas. 6 months passed. The court confirmed Louisa's permanent custody with continuous supervision. Her uncle was convicted. Maximum sentence for crimes of abuse and rape of a vulnerable person. There was no appeal. The evidence was irrefutable. But Louisa did not show up for the trial. She did not want to relive. She was busy living. On a clear afternoon in Brookfield, Louisa was pushing Lucas's stroller on the sidewalk of the temporary shelter. She stopped near a tree. Lucas was sleeping. She then bent down, took a pencil from her pocket, and a folded sheet of paper from her school notebook. She drew 2 figures, a baby and a girl with wings on her back. Above them, for the first time, she wrote a different sentence. "Pain brought me here, but love will take me forward." 5 years have passed. Louisa is now 16. Lucas, 5. His messy hair is always glued to her chest, as if he recognized it as the only truly safe place in the world. They live in a small home, far from the house where it all began, and much closer to the future she decided to build with her own hands. Louisa finished her studies. She was ranked first in the entrance exam for social services. She wanted to help girls. Louisa, girls who cry in the dark and are not heard, who draw what they cannot say, who grow up thinking that surviving is the best they will ever have. But she wants to show them that it is not. They can do more. On that spring afternoon in Brookfield, Louisa was returning home with Lucas after another routine appointment. He, as always, kept talking. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to be strong like you." She smiled, but she didn't answer, because at that moment, she realized that she had already achieved something that no one could ever take from her: to be whole, even after being broken. Today, Louisa no longer defines herself by what was done to her. She defines herself by the choices she made afterward. She still carries scars, some visible, others not even she can name. But all of them are hers. And now they don't hurt. They count. Lucas grew up learning the truth gently, with time, with love. He knows that he came from a difficult place. But he also knows that he was welcomed by arms that, even though they trembled, never backed away. Renata, the grandmother, remains firm by her daughter's side. Today, she no longer feels guilty for not having seen. She understood that it wasn't her fault, but the responsibility for the future now is... Marcelo returned to his family after months of psychological counseling, carefully, listening, without rushing. And it was Lucas himself who one day called him Grandpa. Dr. Valentin, the doctor who has been with Louisa since the beginning, now gives lectures in public schools about violence and active listening. He says he learned more from Louisa than in all his years at college. And Louisa is now an intern at an NGO that helps girls who are victims of abuse. She arrives by bus with a worn backpack on her back and the calm smile of someone who knows the value of survival. She listens to each girl patiently, as if to say, without saying, "I've been there, and you'll get out too." In the hallways of the shelter, where everything started again, there is still a drawing on the wall, signed in crooked but firm letters. "Don't just call me a victim. I am the beginning of something new." This is Louisa's story. At the age of 11, she saw the world fall apart and decided to rebuild, not out of heroism, not out of courage, but because between giving up and continuing, she chose the hardest path, to love, and maybe that's why she won. If this story touched your heart in any way, take this moment and share your opinion in the comments. I'd love to know what you felt. Also, take the opportunity to leave a like, because that helps me continue to bring more stories like this. And of course, if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next stories. There's another video that I believe you'll really like. It's here in the description. I invite you to watch it and continue this journey with me. Until then,